Mega Man X is the most important game I've ever played. This game has a deep nostalgic value to me, and it overall shaped my very taste in games and entertainment at a young age. While for some it was Mario, and for others it was Sonic, for me, Mega Man was the face of video games. Hell, Mega Man 2 was the very first game I ever played. My shackles to this series run incredibly deep, and to honor that, I thought I'd take a big blue look at Mega Man X.
もう一人のヒーロー、ロックマン X、スーパーファミコンで新登場。君はまだ X を知らない。Capcom.
At the time of Mega Man X's release, the mainline Mega Man franchise had hit a whopping 6 titles on the NES. This was quite the considerable achievement at the time, as I can't really think of any other NES games with as many installments, but the classic formula was starting to get stale, and Capcom knew it was time for a big leap forward. Don't get me wrong, I enjoy those later classic games as much as the next guy, but Mega Man needed to change it up now. The formula was getting stale, and everyone knew what to expect. Instead of taking that sweet EA Games approach of releasing the same game every year for 20 fucking years straight, Capcom decided it was time to make a new Mega Man, one meant for the new Super Nintendo console that launched in the 1990s. So how did Capcom take that leap onto the Super Nintendo? X was a massive leap forward for Capcom. It incorporated a considerable amount of new ideas for the Mega Man franchise at the time. Wall jumping, dashing, collectible health upgrades, and armor pieces. This was all a natural evolution of Mega Man. The overall tone of the series also changed with Mega Man X. The lighthearted tone of the classic series is a relic of ancient history for the X games. The narrative takes a much darker and grittier approach than before, at least for Mega Man. I think the opening cutscene that you're presented with upon opening the game demonstrates this shift masterfully. X is the first of a generation of robots that can think, feel, and make decisions for themselves. Immediately, the game lays down the moral dilemma that this free will is a risk, and if X were to defy the first law of robotics, the entire world would be in grave danger. I think it is also worth mentioning that X was Dr. Light's final project before his passing. Dr. Light was the creator of the original Mega Man, so this is a solid way to tie the two series together in some capacity. X possesses great risks as well as great possibilities. I can only hope for the best. I enjoy this quote from Dr. Light quite a bit as it reflects the very design philosophy of Mega Man X. This very installment possessed great risks and great possibilities for the developers, and I'm glad to say that even from the future, in 2022, these risks paid off. Before we get into the actual gameplay and the masterfully crafted intro stage, I wanted to briefly touch on the options menu. Yeah, what the fuck, right? Who cares? Despite this being a pretty trivial thing to discuss right now, this was new territory for Mega Man. The settings menu allows for a sound test as well as remapping your controls. I always like to move my dash button over the right bumper because I find it significantly more comfortable. So hey, I guess that makes me appreciate this settings menu a bit more, eh? Anyways, enough talk about the fucking settings menu. Let's get into the meat and potatoes. And straight out of the gates, I think it's worth mentioning your inability to dash from the start. Even Capcom realized this was a mistake in Mega Man X2 when they changed it and let you dash from the start. But we'll talk more about dashing later. The intro stage does a great job at teaching you the basics of the game without being an in-your-face tutorial with a snail's pace and text bubbles telling you exactly what to do. Yes, I'm talking about Mega Man X5. We still love you, it's okay. The Gunvolt enemy, as it's called, is a fantastic introduction enemy. It teaches you how to dodge 2 different types of attacks and lets you get comfortable with your different types of charge attacks. I also love the Crusher enemies because they're the first enemies in the game that really show the interactive nature of the environment in Mega Man X. To me, this is one of X1's greatest strengths, and it comes up more and more later into the game. The background and overall color palette of this stage is also worth mentioning. While it may appear quite simple in today's day and age, this was brand new ground to cover for the Mega Man franchise. And hey, it looks great. The highway really feels real and alive, which is complemented by the falling platforms introduced later in the level. Upon making your way to the end of the stage, you are met by one of the most iconic sequences in classic video games. You reach Vile, an absolute war machine, who just completely low-diffs your ass. This guy is quite literally unbeatable. No matter how good you think you are at this game, Vile will still always be better than you. And after getting completely bodied by this asshole, yeah, this shit was fucking hype as a kid, bro. Plus, having known about Mega Man Zero due to the Mega Man Zero collection on the DS, I was so excited to see a familiar face. Zero tells you not to feel bad for losing to a scripted event, and tells you can be as strong as him one day, alluding to the upgrades. I suppose now wouldn't be a bad time to set up the plot for the game. Mind you, I am not going to take into consideration the other Mega Man X games and their effects on the plot overall. I'm just going to look at what we know within Mega Man X itself. The new robot masters of the X series are called Mavericks, and Sigma is their leader. He used to be a Reploid like X before COVID hit and he lost all of his sanity during the lockdown. Well, now Sigma has his sights set on eradicating the human race, because why the hell not, right? Well, they're capping out his potential as a robot, so fuck him. Now it is our job as the player, and as X, to go out and kick his ass. Well, there's a solid, simple enough premise to get us out there, shooting some shit, fighting some evil robots. The type of shit you want to see in a Mega Man game. The story does get a lot more complicated than this over the course of several games, but we're not going to get into that. Anyways, now that I've inaccurately displayed what the story's about, let's talk about the stage select and the 8 Mavericks you'll be fighting. One of my favorite little features that Mega Man X adds on the stage select is the spec option. It just gives you a little breakdown of the Maverick, including their name, height, weight, and attacks. It's not super detailed or anything, but I think it's a fun little feature to give you a better idea of what you're up against. Overall, the stage select design itself is a massive improvement over the classic series. There's a map that shows you the general location of each Maverick, as well as a stage preview. Again, these are pretty basic and unnoteworthy things nowadays, but at the time, this was a big step towards more world building in the Mega Man series. Ramblings about the stage select aside, let's dig into some actual stages, starting with Chill Penguin. Chill Penguin is always the go-to starting stage, because the dash boots are located in this stage, which I mentioned earlier. I think these are by far the most important upgrade in the entire game. This introduces one of X1's major flaws in my opinion, which is having the dash as an upgrade. Many of the boss fights and even stages in this game feel like they were designed around letting you dash around, so having it as an upgrade in Penguin stage pretty much forces you to go into that stage first. This kinda kills the fun when it comes to changing up the order, especially on your first boss. It's just basically a challenge run to go for anyone else because lacking the dash boots handicaps your mobility so much. While this doesn't completely ruin variety within runs or anything, it's certainly worth mentioning, as I believe it's X1's most obvious shortcoming. And hey, if that's one of X1's most obvious shortcomings, then the game must be pretty good otherwise. Armor upgrades are represented by the 4 Dr. Light capsules in the game, all of which include a message from Dr. Light as well as the upgrade itself. Getting the dash immediately gives Mega Man X its signature feel, a much faster-paced, more action-packed Mega Man experience with more emphasis on character progression and shooting segments. Another interesting feature is dashing while shooting. If you shoot at the same time as a dash, the pellet will do 2 damage instead of 1. I'm not sure if this was intended as a momentum multiplier of some kind, or if it's just a bug, but it's a fun little mechanic to optimize nonetheless. Otherwise, Chill Penguin stage is pretty good overall. I like the short little ride armor section that lets you choose between 2 different paths, even if they're pretty brief. This kind of level design shows the much clearer design philosophy that they went into Mega Man X with. It's more about decision making as a player and getting to explore the world in the way that you choose to, much different from the classic series where the emphasis was obviously platforming. It didn't really matter what order you went to the stage in, as the challenges remained pretty much intact. The snowball throwing enemies are also a fun obstacle to navigate before reaching the boss gate. Chill Penguin himself is a simple yet enjoyable boss fight. He makes use of an interesting environmental switch on the ceiling which you can pull to generate snow. The snow will push you in a direction it's blowing, so it can synergize in an interesting way with the boss's moveset. Overall, Penguin is a very easy fight, and all of his moves are telegraphed and easy to maneuver around. Despite this, the approach to his design is significantly different than that of the classic series bosses, and it makes a great use of the new wall jump and dashing mechanics. With our first Maverick defeated, it's time to move on to the next, with Storm Eagle. His stage is much more platforming oriented than Penguin's is. It demonstrates the variety that Mega Man X can achieve through both its action sequences and its platforming sequences. Storm Eagle's stage is also a great example of rewarding the player for exploration, with the heart tank at the beginning, the sub-tank hidden up in the glass, and the head upgrade behind the explosive canisters. Speaking of the head upgrade, I think it's the weakest and least interesting upgrade in the entire game. It allows you to break certain blocks with your head, or apparently your feet. This is an alright idea in concept, but it's so rarely used outside of a couple of upgrades in Mammoth stage that it feels like a bit of a waste. All in all, I feel like Eagle stage does quite a good job at blending the action and platforming elements of Mega Man X together to create one of the most memorable stages in the game. I particularly enjoy the run-up to Storm Eagle himself, with the falling platforms and jumping onto his airship, taking out the cannons and finding the secret health and energy pickup on the wing. Storm Eagle's boss arena is another prime example of the new SNES hardware in action. Fighting on Eagle's airship while it crashes to the ground is pretty badass scenery. X really does a great job with keeping every moment action-packed and exciting. This fight itself is one of my favorites, provided you have the dash upgrade, as it's just a nice fast-paced battle of staying in on Eagle and avoiding his dives. Bonus points for his cool design as well. Flame Mammoth is next up on my list. This stage is a solid opportunity to mention one of the most interesting mechanics in Mega Man X. If you complete Penguin stage first, the lava in Mammoth stage will freeze. This allows you to navigate the stage in various ways that were otherwise not possible prior to clearing Penguin stage. The most obvious example being the heart tank that is otherwise unavailable as it just rests in the pool of lava. This is a relatively simple concept, but it does numbers on the world building of Mega Man X and immediately sets it apart from the classic series in that regard. As I mentioned earlier in regards to the helmet upgrade, Mammoth stage has two unlockables that require this. Firstly, the Buster upgrade being hidden away fairly early into the level, and secondly, the energy tank in the section with the mining robots. This is where the head upgrade becomes a foot upgrade for some reason? Sure. In terms of level design itself, this stage is a pretty straightforward run-and-gun through a fun enough factory stage with memorable set pieces that keep the game fresh. None of the stages in this game ever overstay their welcome, and this is no less true for Mammoth stage. As for our Mammoth pal himself, I particularly enjoyed the conveyor belt in his boss room. It continues to add this extra layer of intrigue to the boss outside of just their moveset. They have an environment to interact with. Mammoth's oil sludge attack complements this conveyor belt quite well, as it traps you in place while the belt will push you towards him. This is the first boss in the run where we have the appropriate weakness, being the Storm Tornado from Eagle, which absolutely shreds this guy. We'll talk more about the boss weapons later though. Next I like to take on Boomer Kuwanger. This is to minimize backtracking. Getting his weapon, the Boomerang Cutter, allows access to a sub-tank in Spark Mandrill stage, which we want to go to next. Kuwanger's stage is one of my favorites. It's a long vertical ascent up a massive tower where you meet Kuwanger at the top. This is a stage where platforming has a considerably heavier emphasis, especially for X1, a game primarily built around action shooting segments. This stage also houses an elevator sequence with instant kill spikes and enemies. Pro tip though, if you stand in the right spot furthest to the right of the elevator, You will avoid all the spikes and make it to the top unharmed. I've also always enjoyed the segment following the elevator where there's enemies blocking the ladders and platforms on your way up. It combines that signature run and gun gameplay with a nice platforming section. This part of the level also contains a heart tank that requires some creative use of charged special weapons to acquire. You could also come back with Boomer Kuwanger's weapon after you've defeated him, but that would obviously take much longer. For my speedrunner bros out there, there's also a trick called Iceless, in which you obtain the heart with a perfectly timed jump and no charged special weapons at all. This is like a frame-perfect trick and very hard to pull off. Still a fun little thing to mention, as I used to watch tons of speedruns back in the day. The boss himself is a pretty fun one, although his AI can be completely abused to loop one attack over and over again. I don't quite remember how to do this, but I know it's used in speedruns fairly frequently. If you do fight him normally, he can either teleport around like a moron for 5 minutes, or basically just let you kill him. His weakness is the homing torpedo from Launch Octopus, but we haven't gotten that yet. He's still easy enough with the Buster. On to Spark Mandrill we go, another stage with an environmental shift. Since we've done Storm Eagle first, his airship crash-landed on Mandrill's factory, creating a power outage. This is a fantastic example of world building yet again, and it's my personal favorite stage shift among the three. We got the boomerang cutter beforehand so we could pick up this energy tank. The power outage causes the stage to go dark every now and then, but it's not so annoying or crippling that it ruins the stage. The section with these flying light enemies can be irritating though. The bubble mini-boss in this stage is cool enough. If you want to absolutely melt him, use the Storm Tornado and charge it up with the Gauntlet upgrade we got in Mammoth stage. The second half of this stage contains a heart tank. We can obtain this with the boomerang, or just a well-timed jump. This jump is pretty easy to make consistently, and it's nothing like the iceless jump for Kuwanger. Mandrill stage is another straightforward run and gun level with banging music and fast-paced action that Mega Man X is known for. Upon reaching Mandrill himself, we can finally talk about what the Mega Man community has appropriately named Spark Mandrill Syndrome. Yeah, roll the clip. When they said boss weakness, yeah, they really meant it, didn't they? This is a fairly contentious point for X1, as several bosses' AI just completely shit the bed when faced with their weakness. Critically speaking, this is an obvious flaw, but from a more personal perspective, I actually quite enjoy the ability to roll bosses, provided you know what word to take them on in. Generally, this flaw will vary in its weight depending on the type of player you are, but I for one enjoy the overpowered boss weapons. Armored Armadillo is up next. This stage is run and gun taken to its absolute extreme in Mega Man X. The only time this stage slows down is for fucking frame drops, cause there's too much shit on the screen. I particularly like the mini-boss digging enemies that dig through the terrain in front of them. They had an interesting degree of exploration. For instance, the heart upgrade in this stage is made inaccessible due to the digging robot removing the ledge you would usually be able to wall jump from. If you get creative and find a way to destroy the robot before he digs up that ledge, you can get the heart. The sub-tank in this stage is also well placed. When you encounter the first digging robot, you might wonder, what happens if I go behind where the robot came from? And voila, there's your sub-tank. Otherwise, this stage is incredibly straightforward and fast-paced. After the massive frame drop ride at the end of the level, you'll be met with Armored Armadillo. There's actually another secret in this level, but we'll talk about that later since it requires all other unlockables to reach. Armadillo is a prime example of boss design problems, but in a completely different way than how Mandrill was flawed. Instead of the weakness turning Dillo into a complete joke, it's pretty much a necessity to stand any chance against this guy. If you use Mandrill's weapon, it destroys Dillo's shield, which he can otherwise shield your bullets with. If you try to fight him with his shell on, the fight is significantly more brutal and probably the hardest out of the main 8s. I take issue with this far more than Mandrill Syndrome. The Mandrill syndrome gives you the choice to use an overpowered weapon, whereas Dillo essentially forces you to use the weakness if you want to stand a chance. Overall, he's probably the boss I take the biggest issue with in the game. I can just see it from a new player's perspective, going through the level to come across a boss that seems completely unbeatable and dropping the game entirely. In a game where you can choose any of the 8 stages at any point, this fight is a little too rough in my opinion. Before we move on to the next stage, I suppose it's worth mentioning that going back to Penguin's stage with Mammoth's weapon allows access to the heart tank we missed the first time through. I usually forget about this until I've completed the 8 bosses, but you can come back here pretty much whenever after completing Mammoth. Launch Octopus is the next stage I want to talk about, the resident water level of Mega Man X. I know a lot of water levels are pretty hit or miss for people, but generally I'm a big fan of water stages in the Mega Man series. Whether it be the music, or the general change in color palette, or even the lower gravity on jumps, something just pulls me in when it comes to these stages. Yet again, this stage is pretty simple, with a couple of interesting mini-bosses, just the classic shit that Mega Man X is known for. This stage does, however, contain one of my favorite secrets in the entire game. About halfway through the stage, you stumble upon a ship that you can ride these launch pads up to. After you destroy this ship, it crashes down into the water and it destroys the spikes below it. This unlocks a cool sea serpent mini-boss. It protects a heart tank. Something about this secret was always just so cool to me as a kid. The way the ship interacts with the environment and unlocks a cool little mini-boss, and you get another heart tank. I don't know, something just stuck with me about this one. It's not a particularly crazy secret or anything, but for some reason this one just stands out in my mind. Before reaching the end of the stage, you meet another one of the Sea Serpent robots before eventually reaching Octopus himself. Launch Octopus is one of the hardest fights of the main 8s. Even his weakness isn't super effective, and without it, he's even harder. He spawns a lot of projectiles that fire very fast and can even track you down. He can also do this tornado-like spin attack, which can suck you in and drain your health if you get hit by it. Without the dash boots, I would argue that this is probably the hardest fight in the entire game. After taking out Launch Octopus, it's time for our final Maverick. Sting Chameleon is actually a stage I don't mind taking on earlier in the run on a normal playthrough. I decided for the sake of this video though that it would be better to do Octopus first in order to show off the third and final stage shift. Doing Octopus first causes certain parts of the stage to flood, which allows access to an otherwise unobtainable heart, although you can obtain this heart by using the Charged Ice ability and making a well-timed jump. Chameleon stage also houses the final capsule upgrade, excluding the secret one, which we'll get to. It's hidden behind a mini-boss that takes a solid 30 fucking minutes to kill, but hey, at least he's easy to dodge. The long-ass mini-boss is well worth it, as you are rewarded with the best upgrade in the entire game, other than I guess the dash boots. A 50% damage reduction. Yeah, that's exactly as good as it sounds. If you're a newer player, I'd even encourage coming to this stage earlier just for this upgrade. I don't actually have much to say about Chameleon stage overall. I do like that there's another ride armor section at the end of the stage, as I feel like that was underused in this game, but otherwise this is another straightforward run and gun level that Mega Man X is known for. I will say I also thoroughly enjoy the jungle color palette. It's a nice change of pace from everything else. Chameleon himself has a absolutely horrible case of Spark Mandrill syndrome when faced with the boomerang cutter. Hope they find a cure. With the 8 Mavericks defeated, Sigma's fortress has now been discovered, and it's time to move on to the final stages in the game. But before that, let's go pick up that secret upgrade I was talking about. Okay, so this is perhaps one of the most convoluted and random unlocks I've ever seen in a video game ever, but let's talk about it. The conditions go something like this. Acquire all other unlocks in the game, return to Armadillo stage, and at the very end, at the part with the frame drops, jump to the top where the health pickup is, and then proceed to jump off the stage. Do this 3 times. After killing yourself 3 times in the same spot, the capsule should appear. I really have no idea what the fuck they were going for with this one, but hey, it's an ultra secret that you definitely don't need to beat the game, so it's whatever. This unlocks the HADOUKEN from Street Fighter, executed by the same forward quarter circle input as the games. X can only perform the HADOUKEN at full health, but it one-shots everything. Yeah, even bosses. I think the final boss is the only thing you can't one-shot with it. This thing is definitely fun to play around with if you go out of your way to get it, especially with the upcoming boss rematches in the Sigma stages. As a huge fan of both Mega Man and Street Fighter, this is such a fucking cool upgrade, and to think it was in the very first Mega Man X game as well. Incredible. Something I wanted to quickly touch upon for this secret is that there's actually a bat enemy on the stage that is guaranteed to drop an extra life. He looks like a bat from the original Mega Man games, and that's supposed to be the tell. This guy is strategically placed so that you can stock up on lives before jumping off the stage 3 times. Doesn't completely excuse this random ass unlock condition, but hey, it sure helps. With all of the upgrades out of the way, I think now's a good time to talk about boss weapons. The boss weapons in X1 are some of my favorites in the entire series. Everything has a use, and the arm upgrade gives each weapon further capabilities. I think it's absolutely fair to argue that the weapons are a little too strong in X1, but it lends itself more to my enjoyment in any case. It makes each and every weapon memorable and distinctly useful in certain situations. Take the charged Chameleon Sting for instance. This is Sting Chameleon's weapon, go figure. This thing gives you invulnerability to all damage for a short while when charged up. It's pretty broken and allows for you to skip huge segments in levels, but this also requires you to have found the Buster upgrade in the first place. I, for one, actually believe the level of power you can reach in X1 is one of its greatest strengths. It's like reaching max level in a JRPG and going back to steamroll enemies that have given you trouble before. But instead of just gaining bigger damage numbers or whatever, you gain strength through the tools that you, as the player, need to choose how to apply. I absolutely love this about Mega Man X. The boss weapons in this game are a fantastic representation of the bosses you've defeated, and it really feels like Capcom wasn't afraid to make them powerful this time around. This, to me, is one of the most enjoyable aspects about X1 on repeat playthroughs. So we've got all our upgrades and defeated the 8 Mavericks, now it's time to take the fight to Sigma himself. The first Sigma stage is perhaps the most memorable of the 3 as it spans the greatest length and features some major story moments. We're first met by Zero, who tells us he'll scout ahead. After progressing through some platforming challenges, we'll be met by Zero once again. This time, he's preparing to take on Vile, the villain from the intro stage if you recall. When you walk through the boss door here, you can actually hear the fight between Zero and Vile in action. This is a small detail, but it's a welcomed one as it makes the events that take place feel much more tangible and real. Upon entering the room, we see Zero captured, having failed to defeat Vile, and we are once again challenged by Vile in his ride armor. This is actually where another complaint comes up for me with this game. I don't like how this fight is also a scripted loss, the same as the one from the intro stage. At this point, having all the upgrades, having defeated all the bosses, it feels kind of pathetic and unfitting to still be losing to this dude in a ride armor. As for the story at least, this sets up Zero's sacrifice, which I can appreciate. Zero breaks out of his cage and grabs onto Vile, self-destructing and taking Vile's ride armor with him. With a newfound burst of energy, X breaks out of Vile's trap and can take him on once and for all. Despite not really enjoying the scripted loss here, I do enjoy the impact Vile and Zero have on the story. I can't deny that it's a nice feeling to finally take on Vile here and destroy him with all your upgrades. After defeating him, Zero tells you that he's sustained too much damage, and he dies. If you don't already have the arm upgrade, he will give you his Buster at this point. Unfortunately, Zero's Buster has the exact same properties as X's, so there's no reason to hold out until that point to get the Buster upgrade. But hey, if you missed it, at least it's here. After progressing through more of the stage and rematching Boomer Kuwanger, we reach the Spider Boss. Oh boy, the bane of my younger self's existence. I swear I struggled every time I fought this boss as a kid. He was too fast to Hadouken and I could never predict where he was gonna end up. I still struggle with this fight a little bit nowadays, but I can at least beat it without a sub-tank most of the time. I do enjoy how the environment in the boss room is so intertwined with the boss's attacks. This is something X1 does really well. With that asshole spider out of the way, let's move into the next Sigma level. Sigma 2, a nice simple run-and-gun level with a couple of vertical platforming segments. I'm sure you're sick of me saying this at this point. It also includes some fun ride armor opportunities as well as a rematch with both Chill Penguin and Storm Eagle. I think now is finally a good time to talk about how the boss rush is handled in this game because I absolutely love it. As opposed to being met with 8 back-to-back rematches in the final stage before Sigma, the bosses are spread across the 3 Sigma stages, with the third being primarily boss fight oriented. This helps so much with breaking up the monotony of fighting the same 8 bosses back to back to back that you're already familiar with, and it makes it feel more like a power trip of using your new abilities as opposed to a chore before the true finale. It's a shame that Capcom didn't continue with this into the later X games because they went back to the typical fight the 8 bosses right before Sigma strat. While I don't completely hate boss rushes, I do wish they were a little bit more spread out like X1. Rangda Bangda is the boss of this level, and yet again I love how the environment is used to create interesting scenarios the player needs to avoid. The walls close in on the player, but the eyes and nose of the robot must be destroyed to complete the encounter. It spices things up enough without feeling too bullshit. Overall, this is my favorite of the 3 Sigma stage boss encounters. Next up is Sigma 3, the final full-length stage in the game, though I would hesitate to even call it that since it's primarily just a boss gauntlet. It's a good fun time trying to one-shot the Mavericks with the Hadouken, however it's effective on some more than others. Make sure you take Dillo's armor off before you try to hit him with the Hadouken. I enjoy the in-between segments of this stage that reward the player for using their special weapons. Take these pickups here that require the boomerang cutter to acquire, or these pickups on top of some spikes that require charged chameleon sting to walk across. These are some fantastic ways to quickly test and reward a player's knowledge of the tools available to them. The boss at the end of the stage is the most forgettable of the 3 for me. He just kind of moves back and forth while opening and closing his mouth. Not really any interesting environmental stuff going on here like with the other stages, and I also find him the easiest of the 3 Sigma bosses. With the 3 Sigma stages complete, let's move on to the final battle. The final stage, or Sigma 4 as some may consider it, is just a quick wall climbing section up to Sigma. On the wall there are small holes that some enemies come out of. These enemies can be easily farmed for sub-tank or weapon energy. I absolutely love that the devs put this here as it removes a layer of tedium that would otherwise be present if you had to leave the stage and come back. This also makes deaths to Sigma himself far less frustrating. There's hardly any downtime between rematches, and if you use some weapon energy, you can get it back right away. The fight against Sigma himself is divided into 3 phases. One against Sigma's dog, against Sigma himself, and against Sigma's ultimate form, or whatever you want to call it. The dog is a straightforward and easy fight made even more trivial by the Hadouken. Not much to say about this one. Sigma's first phase is also a fairly simple battle, made a little bit more challenging by his absurd damage output. A well-timed Hadouken can one-shot him right off the bat if that's your style. As for his final phase, this one cannot be one-shot by a well-placed Hadouken. I like this design decision as it at least forces the player to learn one encounter of the 3. This final battle incorporates the environmental boss design I've been gushing over this entire video, with the ability to jump on Sigma's hands in order to get close enough to his head, which is his weak point. The rolling shield from Armored Armadillo is his weakness. This actually also adds another layer of difficulty since this move isn't the easiest to land. It starts falling towards the ground as soon as it's fired. I still end up using a sub-tank here most of the time due to Sigma's absolutely insane damage output. It's a rough time brute forcing this one even with 4 sub-tanks and full upgrades. This really forces the player to learn the fight to at least some extent. Overall, I think Sigma is a fantastic final boss and a great culmination of all that the player has learned up to this point. With Sigma defeated, the day is saved, and the ending plays. I've always loved the ending of this game. It really cements that aforementioned darker and grittier tone. As opposed to focusing on the peace that X has established, the ending chooses to emphasize Zero's sacrifice and the pain that X is subjected to through his decision to fight. It's a much heavier ending than anything the classic series had tried up until this point. It reminds the player that a robot with free will can struggle with their decision making just as a human would. How long will he keep fighting? How long will the pain last? Only the X-Buster on his hand knows for sure. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is Mega Man X, a game with an incomparable impact on me. Having gone through all the content in the game, I think it is finally time to talk about the soundtrack. Because what would a Mega Man X video be without gushing over its godly SNES OST? With all said and done, Mega Man X is one of my favorite video games of all time. While my perspective on this game is clearly heavily biased, I still honestly believe it to be one of the best games of the SNES era. I hope with this video I was able to take other Mega Man fans on a trip down memory lane, and I also hope that maybe with this video I can convince some people who've never tried this game to give it a shot. With the Mega Man X Legacy Collections, the game is easier to play than ever, and I recommend it to anyone who wants a solid action platformer with more of the former than the latter. If you made it to the end of this video, I appreciate you. I know this video is quite the titan. It took quite a bit of time to make, but I think I did my favorite game of all time some justice. Subscribe to the channel, drop a like, hit that bell, leave a comment, and most importantly, get out there and play some Mega Man X.